It had rained all afternoon, the kind of rain that changed the color of Paris without anyone noticing when the change began. By evening it had settled into a thin, well-behaved drizzle. The pavements held a gloss that reflected window lights and the slow yellow winks of a bus taking a corner. In the 3 rooms of the apartment on Boulevard Richard Lenoir, Madame Maigret had closed the windows just enough so the air smelt faintly of wet stone. Boiled potatoes and her soap. "You'll take your scarf," she said, not as a question, but as a domestic fact that had been proven over many years. She held it out, folded like a shopkeeper who knew her customer would accept in the end. "Of course," he said, as if he had decided himself. He was standing with his hands behind his back, looking at the thin thread of water on the window glass. It reached the sill and turned sideways, as though it had been interrupted by a second thought. He filled his pipe without lighting it. He liked the feel of it in the teeth when he was thinking about nothing in particular. Their evenings were often the same in outline and infinite in detail. Some nights a book sat open on the arm of his chair, and he didn't turn a page for an hour. Some nights he turned 3 pages and fell asleep. Tonight he planned to go out after dinner. There was nothing urgent at the quay. A memorandum had arrived in the afternoon with 3 signatures under it and a paragraph which said only that the budget was what it had to be. Inspector Lognon had cornered him at 4 to complain that the café on his street watered its Sylvana. None of it required a scarf after supper. "You'll take your scarf," his wife had said again. Gentler, a reminder that going out for a walk did not have to be an act of bravado. He nodded, slid the wool around his neck. He ate without haste. She had made a stew that would have been better if someone had waited on it, but it did not complain. They spoke about small things. Madame Bourdoux in the next building who had recovered her appetite, a cousin who had sent a postcard showing a fountain where the water was so blue that both of them distrusted it. "You will only be a moment?" she asked when he reached for his coat. "A moment," he agreed. He left with the old heaviness of his coat on his shoulders, the familiar downward slope of the stairs that always made him think he was going into a cellar. Outside, the rain fell with deliberation. It was not unpleasant. There were nights when he took the metro to walk in some fresh quarter, only to find that all boulevards had the same draught under their trees. Tonight he turned toward the Bastille and then away from it, letting his feet settle the matter. His pipe sat unlit in his mouth like a promise he wasn't sure he wanted to keep. He passed a newsstand where the papers were covered by a strip of oilcloth. The vendor was reading something that hadn't yet been clipped to the string and looked up only once to nod. The lights of a small cinema made a puddle of crimson on the sidewalk. A couple stood under the canopy, reading the Times, not speaking. He watched them for a moment. They had that terrible piece of people who have postponed a decision for a few hours by buying 2 tickets. On Rue des Ursulines, a woman in a hat too new for the evening was locking the door of a flower shop. She had left the buckets outside under a canvas and kept reaching to touch the canvas, as if assuring the flowers they were not abandoned. When she turned the key, she noticed the man across the street who had stopped without any special reason and was looking into the sky. The man had the thick neck of a dock worker who had been promoted to foreman reluctantly. He seemed to be counting the raindrops. It was because of him, perhaps, that Maigret stopped. Not to observe him, there was nothing to observe, only to let the street be what it was, with the smell of stems and damp paper, with the tram bell far off, with the soft sound of the woman's heels as she tried the door twice without realizing it. He didn't know why he was thinking of graves. Perhaps it was the flowers. There were nights when the city, without malice, reminded him of the lines that connected things. A flower shop, a cemetery, a café, the warm shape of a hand around a glass, a cheap hotel where the linoleum had been buffed until it gave up, a room with a chair pushed against the wardrobe to keep the door shut because the latch had broken 10 years ago. He crossed to the river. The bridges lay on the water like sleepy animals. He felt the call that the Quai d'Orfèvre always gave him, a professional magnetism, not entirely distinct from superstition, and he followed it, but slowly. A barge moved with the pull of the current and no one on it. The old buildings looked at their reflections, deciding whether to believe them. He stood under a lamp and finally struck a match for his pipe. The flame showed his fingers, their thickness, the small scar near the nail of his left thumb where once, many years ago, he had slipped with a knife, opening a crate of pears. He could not remember the pears, but he remembered the way the blood had looked on the skin, vivid and unsecret. He was not thinking about a crime. He was thinking about the pleasant weight of the tobacco smoke when it settled just so at the back of the throat, and about the fact that when he walked, voices made sense through walls in a way that they didn't when he stood still. Somewhere nearby, a radio announcer was saying the names of orchestras with unnecessary solemnity. In another window, a child laughed and someone shushed him, and the shushing said more about the household than the laughter. A car passed slowly, a black one, its tires hissing. It went in the direction of the prefecture, and then did not. The driver had a cap pulled low, and the passenger, there was a passenger, had his head turned away as if he were looking into a corner between his shoulder and the window. The car's back window was clean except for 2 small crescents of fog where someone had pressed 2 fingers earlier in the evening when waiting. That, too, lodged in him as a detail with no meaning yet. He walked on, down into the narrower streets where water collected, and came at last to a small square where the trees, their leaves black with damp, seemed embarrassed to be trees. There was a bench with no one on it. He sat. Across from him a caretaker was sweeping in slow half-moons in front of a doorway with a brass plate. The caretaker swept as if no one would ever notice, but he would know if he did not. When he had finished, he bent, lifted a small object, a cork perhaps, and put it in his pocket. He went inside without glancing up. Maigret smoked. The bench was wet, but not in a way that would punish him later. He heard a small clatter and turned his head. A stray dog had knocked a bottle against a curb, with the absent air of a connoisseur examining glass. The bottle rolled and steadied itself against the base of a lamp-post. The dog sniffed and moved on, following a trail that, to a dog, must have been written in capital letters across the pavement. He thought of calling home to say he would be a little later, then decided that a man on a bench under a tree didn't need a permit. He sat with the enormous patience that had served him more often than any cleverness. He did not count the minutes, but he would have known if 5 had passed in exactly the way a tailor knows the length of a seam by hand. When he rose again, there was a weight in him, a quiet expectancy. It was not excitement. It was a sense that somewhere a thing was not where it belonged, and the fact disturbed more than the thing itself. He could not have said why. He thought again of the black car with the fogged crescents on the rear window. He thought of the flower seller locking her buckets into the night. He thought of the caretaker pocketing the cork, not out of thrift, but because it was in his way. On the way back, he turned down a street he did not usually take, a habit he cultivated without admitting it. The lamps there were farther apart. In the window of a bakery, a plate of apricot tarts looked recently arranged. Yet the shop was closed. Someone had cared enough to make a display for no one. At the end of the street there was a cemetery wall, not tall, with the modest certainty of municipal stone. He hadn't expected a cemetery here. He had forgotten it existed, which is the proper condition for a cemetery that belongs to people who are remembered only on certain dates. The gate was latched but not locked. He did not go in, there was no reason to, and yet he lingered as one lingers when a house is dark but not uninhabited. Rain tapped on the metal leaves of the gate. He inhaled. Over the wet smell of the city, there was a fainter smell, clean and not of the season. Polish. The scent of polish that could have been for wood or for leather, the kind that people apply with guilty concentration to objects meant to be seen on Sundays. He looked down at the flagstones and saw nothing. The smell was brief, now gone. Perhaps it belonged to him, to his memory of a station in a different town. A bell struck the hour from somewhere hidden behind roofs. He turned away. On the opposite side of the street, a little cafe had not yet given up. The door was open a crack, and inside the zinc bar, with its edges dulled by 1,000 wipes of a cloth, shone like a tired moon. He went in. The patron, who had a moustache, as if only to avoid being entirely bald, nodded. "Bonsoir, monsieur," he said, without greeting him by name and yet with a certain familiarity that came from having lived in a city where people had to know one another without admitting it. "Bonsoir," Maigret answered. He removed his hat and leaned into the warmth. The room had 3 tables, and one was occupied by 2 men with their shoulders touching, not because they were friends, but because the table was small. On the wall, a calendar with a girl in a bathing costume smiled at a month that was no longer current. "Beer?" the patron asked, already reaching. "If you have it," Maigret said. He liked that formulation. It allowed the patron to be generous rather than a supplier. He drank slowly. The beer was not cold and not warm, the way it came in places that were trying to be both bar and kitchen and had succeeded at being neither. He set the glass down and studied the circles it made on the zinc. It struck him that he had been walking towards something without knowing it, and that this feeling had begun earlier than the flower shop. Perhaps at the window of his apartment, when he watched the thread of water hesitate and change direction. The two men at the small table were arguing in low voices about whether to take a job in Rouen for a month. The younger one kept rubbing his wrist with his thumb as he spoke, a gesture that suggested he had once worn a watch chain and now missed the ritual. The older one looked at the door 3 times in as many minutes, though no one came in. From behind the counter, the patron watched them as a man watches the weather, curious without expectation that he will change it. "Is it still raining?" the patron asked when he saw Maigret's hat. The question was less about meteorology than about whether he should send his wife to the market by bicycle in the morning. "A little," Maigret said. "You're from the neighborhood?" the patron asked, polishing a glass that was already polished. "Not far." "New to me," the man said, to justify his curiosity. "We don't get many from the river here, except for the cemetery days." "Cemetery days?" "The 4th and the 13th, the patron said. "It's nothing. Some habits, that's all. A few old ones come for a glass after they go to see their dead. There's a man too, always polite, always with those shoes of his." "Well," he shrugged. The shrug was careful, not to disturb a memory he wasn't sure he wanted. "Those shoes?" Maigret asked, because it cost nothing to ask and because the word had bumped lightly against the other things in his head and made a sound. "Shined like mirrors," the patron said, smiling as though at an indulgence. "You could shave in them. Every fortnight, same time. He buys a single mark, sips it, says good evening and goes." He was going to say more, but the telephone behind the counter rang. He picked it up, made the face of a man trying to keep his side of the conversation from spilling into the room, and said, "Yes, yes, that's right," several times. When he hung up, he apologized and wiped the receiver with his sleeve, a useless gesture that made him feel he had returned something to its proper place. Maigret finished his beer. On his way out, he nodded to the patron, and the patron nodded back and then, as if compelled by some small loyalty to his own story, added, "You know what's odd? He always comes from the cemetery, and he always turns the wrong way when he leaves, toward the new tram stop where there's nothing for him. The shoes go that way. But his dead are the other way." Outside, the rain had narrowed to a mist that collected on eyelashes. He looked once more toward the cemetery gates. The street, which had seemed content with itself before, now held a small, almost private disquiet, like a room where someone had put a chair back, not in the exact place it had been. On the walk home, he kept his hands deep in his coat pockets. He thought of the man with the polished shoes as if he had already met him. He did not try to imagine his face. He listened to the city settling itself around him, lanterns going out one by one, shutters pulled down with the stiff care of people who had mended them too many times. When he reached his building, he stood for a second in the dark just inside the door, letting the last of the outdoor smell slip away from his coat. On the stairs, he heard a radio in a neighbor's flat. A dance tune, cheerful, out of place, as if someone had tipped a bucket of color into a black and white photograph. "You are late," Madame Maigret observed, not displeased when he came in. She had folded the newspaper and set it beneath the lamp so that the light made a rectangle on the table. The apartment had the complete calm of a place that could always be resumed. "There was a cafe," he said, removing the scarf as if surrendering a small defense. She looked at his shoes to see if they were wet, and he felt, absurdly, a quickness in his chest at the sight of them, ordinary as ever, carrying nothing. She poured him a little of the coffee that kept well on the edge of the stove. He sat, warmed his hands around the cup, and said nothing. He did not know that by morning there would be a telephone call, or that he would walk again to that little square, and the street with the bakery and the cemetery wall, and that the matter of the polished shoes would turn from a half-heard anecdote into a fact one could not place where it belonged. He only felt that slight, unmistakable misalignment, the way one sometimes feels a picture on the wall has been rehung a fraction of an inch off level, and that, for reasons not entirely to do with justice, It would keep tugging at him until, by waiting and listening, he learned whose shoes they were, and why in a city of graves. They stood beside the wrong one. At 8, the telephone rang with stubborn politeness. Madame Maigret put down the dishcloth and looked at him. He had been waiting for it without admitting it. Chief Inspector. Bertrand from the post on Rue des Ursulines. There's a small matter at the cemetery. The caretaker thought better to ask. Which caretaker? Lagrange. He says there are footprints where there shouldn't be, and an object left. He asked for you by name. He could believe it. I'll come, he said. You'll take your scarf, Madame Maigret said, the eternal clause in their household grammar. It seems made for it. Morning had rinsed the city without drying it. He walked rather than summon a car. The cemetery gate was hooked back as if someone had been called away mid-sentence. A man with a broom came toward him, nudging puddles from gravel. Lagrange was grey everywhere. Hair, jacket, even his skin had a dusting from stone. You took your time, he said without reproach. It's never urgent with the dead. What is it then? This way. He led along a path edged with wet box hedges. We close at 7, I go round. Nothing. At 6 this morning I unlock. And there they are. Shoes. Polished like a mirror. Set side by side before a stone that isn't theirs. They were as described, black. Good leather, soles barely marked, laces tucked inside. A faint smell of polish rose when Maigret crouched. Whose grave? Madame Edith Vasseur, née Le Pic. 20 years gone. Widowed, no children. The flowers are from Sunday. I removed the dead ones. These were placed this morning. Footprints. 2 sets, Lagrange went on. One heavy, a man who walks his weight. One light coming later, stepping in the first prints. I smoothed them, but you can see where the gravel is younger. The stone said Edith Vasseur, 1896-1935. A little enamel pot of violets sat at the base. Who tends this grave? The brother's widow when her knees allow. Once a month, a lady from Rue Rollin paying a promise. The brother lies in Ivry? And the shoes? I have not touched them, except to make sure they were empty. You did right. Maigret put a finger inside one shoe. Dry. The sock imprint was firm. He imagined bare feet on gravel, careful to avoid damp patches. Did you see anyone this morning? A boy with bread. The black car that sometimes creeps by the wall. And our man, the one from the cafe. He comes the 4th and the 13th. Today is neither. He came before 7 and stood by this grave. Usually he goes farther, the old section. His shoes were on then and not as shined as these. Describe him. 45. Coat with cuffs once turned. Hat that fits the habit, not the head. Hands he doesn't know what to do with. Polite. He says bonjour to the stone. He sent Bertrand for a photographer, not for the shoes, but for the paths. While the man trotted off, Maigret leaned against the damp wall where the black car would creep. He thought of the patron's remark. The polished shoes, the mark, the turning the wrong way. Do you have a book of visitors? Only for Toussaint. For ordinary days, I keep a head book. Lagrange tapped his forehead. A woman in a brown coat knelt to scrub a plaque with a rag dipped from a little bottle. When Dardenne from the local station arrived on a complaining bicycle, tidy and out of breath, he asked, "You'll want statements." "Not yet. Watch who comes. Don't speak." Dardenne planted himself by the gate and tried to look uninterested. At 9:15, a woman came with a bouquet she kept turning head down. At 9:30, a porter peered over the wall and vanished. Nothing happened, which was its own sort of news. At last Maigret left Lagrange with a raised eyebrow that promised return and walked to the café with the tired zinc, not for answers, but for something to hold. "Ah, you came back," the patron said. "I was passing. You'll take a beer? A coffee. And if that gentleman with the shoes comes, let him be. I'll sit there." The coffee came thick and unpersuasive. Maigret held the cup and listened to the street fit into its grooves. A cart bumping a seam, the telephone that would ring twice and be answered the second time. When it did, the patron said yes with resignation, then extended the receiver. Longnon came the voice, already disapproving. "I hear you're taking the air among tombs, while we have actual crimes. A burglary with no fingerprints. Burglary with no fingerprints. Burglary." "Later," Maigret said, "look in your pocket for the fingerprints. I have no patience for your jokes. It isn't a joke. See if the householder greets you as if you've come to fix the plumbing." He set down the receiver and took his pipe without lighting it. The door opened. A square of cooler light fell on the zinc. A man stood in the frame as if seeking permission to enter. His hat did not fit his head but fitted the habit. His shoes, for now, were ordinary, yet had the air of objects cherished in private. He removed the hat with a politeness learned young and came to the bar. "A mark, if you please," he said. The voice was carefully colourless. Maigret kept his gaze on the coffee. He felt the man the way one feels a chair scrape in the room above. The patron set down the glass. The hands hovered a fraction before taking it. In that fraction one could read a life in which hands had not always been sure. He sipped, set the glass where a ring already marked the zinc, and addressed the room rather than either man. "Good morning," he did not linger. He paid exact and turned toward the door that led, if not to the cemetery, then to whatever wrong direction habit required. At the threshold he paused, as if remembering an errand that refused to give its name, and in that pause his gaze crossed the inspector's hat, coat, the shoulders, the unlit pipe. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Is the cemetery open already?" "It is," the patron answered. The man nodded, put on his hat a little stiffly, and went out into the thin light. The door let in a square of street smell, wet stone, yeast, a trace of polish, and closed again with a binding sound that told Maigret they would see those shoes, and that grave, once more before noon. Maigret finished the coffee, stood, and felt the day tilt subtly, as if a picture had shifted a finger's breadth. He left by a minute, no more. Maigret gave him the courtesy of two, paid, and stepped outside where the light had thinned to a dry pearl. The street contained only what it needed: the bakery breathing warm air, a mechanic coaxing a shutter up by half measures, and the man with the misfitting hat walking toward the cemetery with the punctual awkwardness of someone keeping an appointment with a place. Maigret didn't follow beside him. He followed at the distance of weather, in that faint wake people make when they hold themselves too carefully. At the corner, the black car slid past with the same low hiss, the passenger's head turned away as before. The man did not notice. He kept his eyes on the ground a few paces ahead and turned in through the gate. Lagrange had resumed his slow sweeping, which was both work and philosophy. He recognized the hat, then found Maigret with a question he didn't voice. The polished shoes stood like small actors, waiting for a cue at Madame Edith Vasseur's stone. The newcomer halted a little distance off, as if addressing a person seated on a bench. He touched his hat brim a fraction, and drew one careful breath, then another. He stayed like that a minute, two, patience that did not reach the hands. Then he moved, not toward the shoes, but along the path, as if his errand had changed underfoot. He passed poor graves where the photos had clouded like eyes gone blind, stopped again, and listened the way one listens to a dark room to tell if it is occupied. Maigret didn't step into sight. He watched the paths. The lighter footprints had crossed and recrossed the heavier ones near Vasseur's stone. Not a woman's. A cautious man testing his own intention. When the visitor turned back and finally saw the polished pair, the recognition passed through his face, with the small recoil of a man who finds his handwriting where he doesn't remember writing. He looked around quickly, met no one's eyes, and did what awkward men do when propriety surprises them. He tidied what was already tidy. He nudged a heel, straightened a bow, and placed his palm for a second on the cold leather, as if greeting a substitute for a person. "Pretty things," Lagrange offered, friendly without siding. The man nodded, not trusting his voice, and started away. Maigret let him come close before speaking, and when he did it was almost an apology. "Pardon, monsieur." "A match." The man produced a box at once, and held it so the inspector could take a single stick without making the exchange a trap. "Merci," said Maigret, not lighting his pipe, turning the match between thumb and finger. "Do you come often?" "To the cemetery." The voice came soft and obedient. "From time to time. On the 4th and the 13th, Maigret said. "And today." He lowered his gaze at the arithmetic of that. "Yes." The silence that followed belonged equally to them. When the matchbox missed his pocket and then found it, Maigret registered the clumsy correction, as someone returning to a clothing pattern his hands no longer believed in. "You know Madame Vasseur?" he asked, as one asks about the weather at sea. "No, yet you greet her. One greets the neighbor when one passes," he said, relieved to have produced a reasonable sentence. "Your name?" "Lambert," he said after too brief a hesitation. "Julian. Your shoes, Monsieur Lambert." He looked down at his own pair, surprised to find his feet attached, then at the polished ones by the grave. A quick, embarrassed color rose, the chagrin of a household object discovered on display during a visit. "They are being trusted to dry," he said. "In good weather," Lagrange muttered, not unkindly. "There was a puddle," Lambert added, as if a lie could be improved by a stain of truth. "I would not carry mud near her." He meant the grave, but the pronoun trembled, and the tremor was what had been tugging at Maigret since the café. He looked at Lambert's hands, clean in the way of hands that have done work that can be washed off and still remember a handle. A ridge at the left wrist suggested a fracture healed in a hurry. "Where do you live?" "Rue Rollin, Madame Delorme's, 3rd floor. The window looks at a wall that is honest about it." "Work I carry." "Crates at the station market, mornings, then I walk. Toward a grave that is not yours." The sentence did not need to be spoken. From beyond the wall came the far hum of a car deciding nothing. "You didn't put those shoes there?" Maigret asked mildly. Lambert breathed once, twice. "No, but they belong to you. They're mine," he said, as if the words came stapled to a receipt. "I keep them well." "A man must keep something well if he is not kept. Then who placed them?" "I don't know." "And why before Madame Vasseur?" "I don't know her," he repeated, the words carrying the small soreness of a man denying a name that had once divided bread evenly. Maigret nodded. "Forgive me if I ask you to come for a walk." Lambert looked at the caretaker, as if Lagrange might arbitrate the trap. Lagrange swept with exaggerated attention, the caretaker's way of advising a man to go where he is asked by a hat like that. They went out together, not at the same pace but with the rhythm of two people acknowledging the other's feet. At the café, the patron raised his chin. They took the window table. Maigret did not reach for a notebook. He warmed his palms on the wood. "You come the same days twice a month," he said. "You drink 1 mark. You turn the wrong way when you leave?" "So they say," Lambert murmured. "Who taught you the wrong turn? No one. There are paths a man chooses because the right one has been too used. There is a grave you do know, yes. Whose?" "Hers," he said simply. "Not Madame Vasseur." "Marie-Luce Thévenoud, Section D, row 8. The photo is spoiled, and makes her look as if she never believed anything." Which was not true. He said the name carefully, as if setting it down without noise. "And why lay your shoes by another woman's stone?" "They were not hers," he said at once, misunderstanding and also answering something. "Marie-Luce had feet that wanted to be bare. You loved her." "I was everything and nothing," Lambert said with a small, practical shrug. "There is no word that doesn't make a clown of a man in a café." "She died when?" 11 months. "The 13th. He glanced up apologetically as if borrowing the number from a calendar. Some people smile at the date. "I cannot help the city's arithmetic, cause?" He wasn't ready to give it a word. Which meant an ordinary cause dressed in shame, a fall, a draft, a bottle, a man. "She went," he managed. "You were not her husband?" "No." "Who was?" "No one. Before me there was a clerk who counted coins by hearing them. He left when the coins changed pockets. And the black car." A small clean flinch tightened and released his mouth. "What car?" "The one learning these streets by tires." "Streets by tires." "I don't know it." "You are followed," Maigret said, as if stating a pressure in the weather, "by someone who does not want to step on gravel until he knows it won't give way. He turns his head when he passes. You don't see him because you look at the ground." "What would he want?" Lambert turned his hands over, almost surprised to find no ink, no blood, only the pale cleanness of someone who has washed too much since something happened. Marie-Luce had a small notebook. "I haven't got it. I thought it would be with her things. It wasn't. If someone had it, he wouldn't follow me. I don't look like someone with secrets." "On the contrary," Maigret said gently, "you look exactly like that." The patron brought water unasked. Lambert drank half as if obeying a doctor, and replaced the glass precisely in its wet ring. "I did not put the shoes there," he said again, more to himself. "But when I saw them, I knew someone had understood me and decided to make me ridiculous or afraid. It worked." "You are not ridiculous," Maigret said, and left the second word to inhabit the room by itself. He stood. "We'll go to Marie-Luce," he said. "Then to Madame Delorme. On the way you will tell me what should have been in the notebook you did not read." Lambert rose, hat in hand, not putting it on yet, a gesture of respect addressed to a woman under stone. "It was for her sums," he said, "but she made more notes than purchases." "Names?" "And shoes," Lambert said unexpectedly. She wrote down shoes, not mine. Other men's, the way they were kept. She said a man betrays himself there sooner than in his smile. They stepped into the street, the day assembling its small phrases around them. The bakery had replaced the apricot tarts with loaves that suited the hour. A boy went by with a ladder on his shoulder, humming a tune too sad for his age. The gate of the cemetery looked smaller, as if it had retreated a step. On Rue Rollin, the windows held the closed expression of people expecting nothing before noon. The misalignment tugged again in Maigret. The sense of a chair moved not a finger's breadth but a palm, and he let his feet choose the first turn that would make the truth feel obliged to meet them halfway. They went first to Section D, Row 8, where the path narrowed and the names were humbler, the photographs cheaper, and more often cracked into a spider's web that made the faces look both guilty and caught. Marie-Luce Thévenot's stone had been scrubbed with a thrift that did not remove the stain where a geranium pot had once leaked its red clay into the porous border. The photograph, as Lambert had said, had clouded her eyes into a look that a stranger would have called stubbornness. There was a little misaligned angel on the corner, its wing repaired with glue. Lambert paused 2 steps away and took off his hat, as if there were a ceiling even out here. He did not speak. He had the air of a man whose words had been counted out and spent, and who would not borrow. Maigret stood beside him and looked at the tiny daily facts that graves carry, bits of moss like lace on a collar, 2 cigarette ends pressed, carefully, under the edge of the base so that they would not blow away, a paper twist from a florist, flattened by rain and still holding the memory of scent. He bent and touched the paper. The glue had not dissolved. He brought it to his nose and, under the damp, found that same clean, dated smell, polish. Not the polish of a shoe maniac, the cheaper, sharper one used on banister rails and counters that have to shine for the eye even when the hand will know better. "Someone tidies here who does not belong to you," he said. Not accusing. "The widow of the brother," Lambert answered, but the reluctance in his voice told him he knew that wasn't enough. "A woman from the building came once with chrysanthemums, but she put them at the wrong one. She never knew her. Who smokes Gauloisie Bleu?" He picked up one end between careful fingers. Lambert's mouth moved toward an answer, and then closed. "I don't." "Nor did she," Maigret said, remembering the modest angel and the glued wing. "A man who smokes and hides it like a schoolboy." He pushed the end back under the base exactly as it had lain. Lagrange, unseen from here, would approve the respect for a place's habits. "She wrote down shoes," Lambert said suddenly, because speaking of cigarettes was safer than speaking of the dead. "She said a woman in the shop knows what shoelaces a man buys for himself, and which he wears because someone tied them for him years ago." I told her she made poetry of laces. "What shop?" "She kept ledgers for Madame Ferraud's haberdashery on Rue Le Monde. Not much. She added up, she dusted. She put away ribbon by colors so close you needed a better lamp to see the difference. And the notebook. I thought it would be there when I went after—" He glanced at the photograph and found no help in those spoiled eyes. "It wasn't. Madame Ferraud said she had never seen it. I believed her. There is a way a woman says she hasn't touched a thing that convinces the air. Anyone else ask about it?" Maigret said gently, a clerk with neat hair who wore his pen like a medal. He made a list while he was standing. He didn't care about the dead. He wrote down the living. They walked out again, not in a hurry. The black car was not by the wall now, but 2 faint arcs of dampness showed where tires had pressed gravel when the morning was newer. On Rue Rollin, the windows looked at nothing, as they had promised. The boarding house had a door whose paint had learned resignation. Madame Delorme answered in slippers and a cardigan, the exact brown of dried tea. She did not ask who they were. She looked at Lambert's hat in his hand, then at Maigret's overcoat, and made a half movement toward smoothing. Her hair that came too late to be useful. "You've been to see her," she said to Lambert in the tone of someone who accepts a weather that makes the washing slow to dry. He nodded. "And you will come up after a moment," she instructed, although he was already inside the hall. To Maigret she offered both suspicion and hospitality in one glance. "If you're selling nothing, come in. Don't wipe your shoes, it shines the dirt." He followed her smell of starch and boiled coffee upstairs that had been cleaned more often than repaired. The corridor held wallpaper, whose pattern of faded sprigs looked from a distance like damp creeping in. A clock ticked, with the stubbornness of machines that know they're not admired. Lambert's door had a key that had grown used to not being turned. He opened without ceremony. The room was honest about its size. There was a bed with a cover so tight you would have had to ask permission to disturb it. A chair placed to look at the wall that was honest about it. Canned on a small table, a brush laid with its bristles cleaned of any hair as if hair were a confession. Madame Delorme lingered in the doorway. "It is not much," she said before anyone could say it. "But it is clean. I like that. He pays on Thursday without my asking. He is one of the few men I still trust not to leave by the back." "Has anyone come asking for him?" Maigret said, as though inquiring about the milkman. "A man with a soft voice that did not match the shoes," she replied, pleased to have a detail. "He said he was from the railway and wanted to confirm work hours. I told him to go to the station to learn the station, and he smiled like a person who had already drawn a map no one else would see. The shoes shined like he expected to be inspected, new, but the soles weren't noisy. That kind do not like to be heard. They think silence is cleanliness." She cocked her head and added, not as an afterthought but as something she had saved, "He carried an umbrella, though it hadn't started yet. You know the sort of man who is from the weather of the next hour." "What did he ask?" "If there were letters for Monsieur Lambert, if anyone came, if Madame Thévenot ever visited. I said, 'She's dead.' And he said, 'Yes, of course.' Not like a man who's surprised by death, but like a man who had just checked a date in his head. Then he asked if Julian had ever left his shoes outside his door to dry. He said it with a smile that was supposed to be a joke. Has he? Never. He takes them into his room like a mother with a child that coughs at night. Others leave their boots for me to trip over, and then blame the step. Not him." She looked at Lambert with a practical affection that did not embarrass him because it asked nothing. "He eats the same every evening, and it is a good way to live." "What same?" said Maigret, "because there are questions that loosen other answers. A roll, a soup, some cheese when he thinks he deserves it. He washes the bowl immediately, like a man who once lived where dishes multiplied in the night. He speaks when spoken to, which in this house is a virtue. Who else asked about Marie-Luce?" he continued. "The woman from the ribbon place told me, Ferro, that a gentleman from an office came and took away the paper where she had written down what they owed her for the last week. She said he had a seal in his pocket. Perhaps a lawyer. I am not against lawyers. In this house we respect stamps. Did the gentleman smoke?" Maigret asked into the room, though his attention had gone sideways toward the remembered cigarette ends. "I cannot say. He left nothing but a certainty that he never ate in front of people who counted." "Did he have a car?" "I didn't see him arrive. But there was a car that held itself too straight for this street. It waited without pretending it wasn't waiting. The driver wore a cap without remembering why men used to wear caps. Maigret moved to the table and looked at the brush again. The bristles were spaced with that mean economy seen in cheap things that try to appear strict. Beside it lay a tin of polish, furniture, not shoes, and a rag. He opened the tin and found it exactly as the scent in the cemetery had promised. "You polish your table?" he asked Lambert. "The chair squeaked," Lambert answered. "I thought perhaps it wanted to be fed." It turned quiet, which made the room louder. "You took your shoes off somewhere yesterday," Madame Delorme said, pleased with herself for remembering at last. "Not here. You came in without them, and carried them like babies that have been bathed. You went down again a minute later, as if you had forgotten to tell the concierge a dream." "Where?" said Maigret, his tone without weight. "In the hall," Lambert said, awkward with the truth because it sounded more deliberate than it had been. There was grit. "I didn't want to bring it in. Was there anyone on the stairs?" "The smell of onions," he said, "and a man's cough that didn't want to announce itself. And when you came back," Madame Delorme added, "you had your shoes on and wet from something that wasn't rain." Lambert looked at the floor as if it might tell him what he had stepped in. "I went out because I thought I had heard," he began, then stopped, not wanting to be laughed at. Her step. "It was nothing. The shoes were wet from my imagination. Where do you leave your shoes when you visit Marie-Luce?" "I don't. I keep them on. I am not a saint to go barefoot. But when I saw the puddle near Vasseur, I thought how it would look to bring dirt to women who have so little left to be angry about." Down in the street the sound of a car came and then steadied into idling. It was the kind of patience engines acquire when they are being paid by the hour. Maigret went to the window. All he could see was the opposite wall, honest about it. He did not need to see the car to know it had the same habit as the man with the umbrella, arriving from the weather of the next hour. He turned back and said, almost as if changing the subject, "The notebook, if it had names, they were not men's names only. There would be a woman. There is always a woman who keeps other people's schedules in her head. Who would that be?" "Madame Ferraud keeps shops, not souls," Lambert said. "And the widow?" "She keeps grievances," Madame Delorme said crisply. "They shine longer than shoes." "So," Maigret murmured as if concluding a recipe. He put the lid back on the polish and left the rag as it had lain. "You will come with me to Rue Lomond. We will let ribbons talk. Then we will call on the widow who keeps grievances and see how she arranges flowers when no one is expected." He picked up his hat. In the corridor the clock hesitated, as if asking permission to strike. It decided against it. The idling in the street deepened, like a throat being cleared politely. They went down together, Lambert a step behind. At the door, the cool day smelled of starch and damp stone, and the faint orderly cleanliness that follows a new brush across old wood. As they stepped out, the car moved just enough to show it had been listening. Maigret did not look at it. Instead, he noticed a fine grit on the threshold that was not the house's. It had the mineral brightness of gravel from a different yard. He touched it with the toe of his shoe lightly, as if greeting an acquaintance, and led Lambert toward the shop, where colors nearly the same have always been an excellent place for concealment. They found Rue Lomond holding its breath, the way streets do that trade in small necessities. Madame Ferraud's haberdashery was narrow, and so well dusted the dust smelt like pride. The bells on the door spoke twice when they entered. Behind the counter, a woman with hair set on Monday to last the week looked up from a ledger, with the absent keenness of someone keeping 3 tallies while her hands did something else. "Bonjour?" "Madame," Maigret said, not showing his card. "It was not that kind of room, bonjour," she returned, setting her pencil on a clean margin to keep it from wandering. "You'll have noticed satin is dearer. It isn't my fault. We've come about a woman who handled your satin without ruining it," he said softly. "Marie-Luce Thévenot." Madame Ferraud's gaze shifted to that middle distance where truth waits while one chooses phrasing. She was punctual and did not overtalk, she said. There was a sweetness when she counted coins. She wanted them right, not in her favor, not in mine. She became thinner in spring. I told her to use the chair. She said she preferred to stand because chairs make debtors of our spines. And her notebook? She kept my book like anyone. If she had a second, it was hers. You would have seen it. Not necessarily. She reached toward a drawer and shut it again, a reflex with no object. She palmed small things one after another, without seeming to take anything. Pins mostly, an honest habit. With pins one can pretend to order the world. And after she died, Maigret said, as if repeating a recipe, a man came who took a paper with a seal in his pocket. A gentleman, she allowed. Very sensible. He said her small account would be settled direct, and I was not to trouble about pennies. He signed a receipt with a pen that knew it would be witnessed. His name was Colin. Perhaps 1L. He didn't leave a card where it smells of starch. He smoked. In the doorway to be polite and left the smoke inside all the same. I opened the window and the ribbons breathed as if corsets were unfastened. Did he ask about a notebook? No. He asked if she had spoken to anyone about being owed. He said Mademoiselle Thévenot disliked to be obliged. I agreed. Agreeing is part of my trade. Lambert stood at the counter's end, looking at laces hung pale to dark like a day's weather. His look wasn't pain. It was the respect of a man for a simple thing properly ranged. Who bought shoelaces this week? Maigret asked. All sorts. This is a street where shoes keep their own rhythm. But there was a gentleman with hands too fine for packages, who ordered black, round, waxed 1 meter, then changed his mind without changing his voice. He didn't like to say round and gave a coin I had to wipe, which is an insult one hides in the till. She paused, smelling memory. He held his umbrella as if it could testify. A pen in his pocket? Always. Her mouth made a thin line at men whose pens sign receipts no one else will read. Colin, perhaps. That might be. His shoes were quieter than his questions. When a man asks without seeming to, the floorboards answer. A girl came from the back with a box of hooks and eyes. She looked once at Lambert and away, understanding that absence can be a service. Did Marie-Luce write anything here that wasn't numbers? Maigret asked. Madame Ferraud smiled the smile she used for customers who believed a ribbon changed a life. Sometimes she tore a strip from around a bolt and made little lines in threes while she watched the door. She said it kept time. Once she drew shoes without feet. I scolded. It was my paper. She wasn't offended. She said shoes don't lie about where they've been. Did anyone come after asking for scraps? The gentleman with the umbrella asked for rubbish to light his cigarette. I gave him nothing. What about the 4th and the 13th? Maigret said. You notice such days? They are when pensioners buy thread to persuade their coats to last. Also when men come pretending to buy for women and ask for colours women wouldn't wear even to haunt a corridor. Yes. There was a man who glanced at the door every 20 seconds on the 13th last. He bought nothing and left with a sigh that had been waiting in his chest all days. Morning? Describe him. He had the hat of someone who respects hats and wore it, low as if afraid anyone would recognize the top of his head. Shoes good, not new. Laces tied by someone else long ago and never again fully undone. The smell about him was car leather and a cologne that apologizes after it speaks. The bell rasped. A draft touched the ribbons like fingers. A man stepped halfway in, saw Lambert, and retreated with the early recognition of inconvenience. The bell betrayed him again on the way out. Madame Ferraud's mouth tightened. Some men come as though the counters will stain them. Do you know him? Maigret asked. I know his shoulders. He has been here twice in a fortnight to buy nothing. He reads my prices with the contempt of someone whose money isn't under his own authority. You will make me a small package, Maigret said. 2 sets of black, round, waxed 1 meter. And ribbon, nearly the same blues that are not the same. He paid. Waited while she wrote a receipt the way women do, who expect it to be examined by no one and by God, and left with Lambert into a light thin-to-paper grey. At the corner where Rue Le Mans thinks of becoming something else, the car waited with trained patience. It didn't follow at first, which was clumsier than if it had. They turned down unhurried toward the widow, because one shouldn't leave her waiting when she doesn't know she is. The engine coughed once and came on. Maigret let it. He wanted the driver to decide which side he preferred. Colin, Lambert said, as if the name were a pebble in his shoe. I don't know him. You wouldn't, Maigret said mildly. Men like that belong to dossiers and weather reports. They come on behalf of associates who prefer their money passive. The widow's building had a stairwell, whose glass had cracked along the diagonal of its life, and geraniums trained to survive discouragement. Maigret pressed a bell that produced a sound like a clearing throat. The door opened the width of suspicion. A woman in a dress that had become armor looked out with the advantage of being unimpressed. Madame Vasseur? I'm Vasseur by fatigue, Lepic by mistake, she said, making space with reluctance that wasn't personal. She must greet the meter man the same way. What do you want that isn't in the letter from the cemetery taxing the earth again? We've been by the grave, Maigret said. An odd courtesy was left there this morning. The shoes, she said at once, shaping the word with disapproval because approval would cost too much. Someone thinks I need reminders. I go when I can. I don't require ornaments. You didn't put them there. I don't put anything anywhere I can't watch it. Who are you? He named himself without flourish. Calculation moved across her face, and then a small softening from the memory of a policeman once returning a drunk nephew without a report. Sit, she said, wiping a chair with her apron, although it was clean. Lambert remained standing, as if accepting blame for being taller than her framed dead. Who left the shoes? She asked, wanting him to tell her, because not knowing had already damaged her authority over her sorrow. We're trying to learn that. Who visits besides you? People who like to think themselves faithful. A girl with a hat pretending not to be new. A man who talks to the stone as if it will answer. I asked him once what he thought it would say. He said only that I am late. My sister would have liked that. She excused the worst with a sentence that made her feel charitable. You saw a car belonging to men who never walk. It prowls. My sister knew the sound of shoes on those paths. She disliked engines. Do you know a Colin? I know a Collins and a Colin. Which sort? Pen in the pocket. Umbrella that testifies, laces that prefer to be noticed. That one came to ask who had a right to my sister's things. I told him right is a word people use to mean appetite. He wanted a notebook. He didn't say notebook. He said little book. I told him whatever we had we burned if it wanted burning, and he said that would be a pity for everyone concerned. She looked at Maigret without blinking. He knew something did not fit. What would not fit? My sister's death. It sat on her badly. She folded and unfolded her hands because they had nothing to do. She fell, they say. Women fall. It's a profession we learn with our first apron. But she didn't fall the way the paper wrote. The bruise was wrong, and the day before a gentleman called smelling of new leather and last year's cologne. You saw him? I saw his shadow on the stair and the polish he left on my lint, she said. I swept after him the way you erase a word you don't want a child to learn. She levelled her gaze at Lambert without unkindness. You loved her. Yes, he said, the word small and absolute. I don't blame you. My sister collected missorts and kept them upright until she tired. If there is a book, it is because she knew she would forget who owed decency and who owed money. And shoes beside the wrong grave. Maigret asked. That is a joke in bad taste or a map, the widow replied. If it's a joke, I'll survive it. If it's a map, someone is moving us the smallest possible distance toward where he wants us to stand. They left her with her armor and geraniums. Outside, the car at last chose a side. The passenger's head was turned toward his shoulder. The driver's cap had learned not to fidget. Maigret lifted his parcel so they could note ribbon colors nearly the same. Bundles embarrass men who pretend indifference. They pretended anyway. He led Lambert without haste toward the bakery, where decisions ripen like loaves. The day had thinned to a grey that took the shine off everything, even the fear in Lambert's mouth. Let them come a little closer, he said. When they think we're discussing pastries, we'll ask a question that costs nothing and answers more than it owes. They crossed to the bakery as if choosing bread could be a philosophy. Heat under the awning rinsed the grey from their faces. Maigret asked for a bâtard and for the end to be cut off. He liked the heel while it was still thinking of the oven. The girl smiled. Men who ask for the heel remind her of grandfathers. They've parked, he murmured, passing the loaf to Lambert. Let's be tedious shoppers. They examined pastries they didn't want. The door beads ticked. The driver came in without removing his cap. He asked for 2 eclairs in a voice used to telephones. Good day, Maigret said. The man nodded and laid a 5-franc piece. The girl counted anyway. He turned and found Maigret's gaze on his cuffs, which bore a faint dust the color of cemetery gravel. The eclairs will sweat in the car, Maigret observed. We're not going far, the man said. A gentleman's name? Maigret asked, as if bound for the same address. I've a paper to return that belongs in a pocket like his. The driver's smile was brief. He'll know you when he needs you. That's an uncomfortable way to live, Maigret said. The man left with a bag that made him comic. Outside, the passenger turned his head a fraction. He tapped the glass once. The car moved without moving away. They don't want us, Lambert said. They don't yet know what they want, Maigret answered. They ate bread mechanically. Then he led Lambert to the little square and sat again on the wet bench. The car waited at a distance. What was wrong with the bruise? He asked. She fell backward, they said. The bruise was on the front of the shoulder, high, as if a hand had caught and flung, then let go. And no doctor who minded to write that. Doctors don't live in this quarter, Lambert said. They visit. The cafe telephone rang. The patron lifted the receiver. For you, he called, it was Lognon. Your burglary was a domestic. The husband kept cash in a vase. Your advice about the pocket was a waste. Your time is hardy, Maigret said. Do you know a Colin, with 1 L or 2, who moves with an umbrella and a car? I know 3. One's a councillor who would complain if it rained gold. One's a liquidator for a shoe wholesaler in Saint-Denis. The third is a notary's clerk. Why? Because a dead woman collected men by their shoes. See what the liquidator is dissolving. Am I your errand boy now? Only for an hour, Maigret said. He replaced the receiver. The car idled, then killed the engine. Lambert watched his hands like a man who expects them to act and forgives them when they don't. When she made her little lines, Maigret said, Did she hum? She counted under her breath. She was afraid at the end. Yes, not of dying. Of being accounted for by people who had not bothered to know her. They rose and walked toward the river. He didn't mean to shake the car, only to stretch the street. At the quay, the wind flattened the drizzle. They turned toward the prefecture without entering. Shall we draw them into worse light? Lambert asked. We will let them draw themselves, Maigret said. But first a stop. He went into a tobacconist's. He bought matches and asked, "Madame, do you sell polish for furniture?" "In the back," she said. "We keep it with the boot blacking because men refuse to believe wood and leather are different." He bought a small tin of the cheap kind whose smell had threaded the morning. When they came out, the car was closer. The passenger's face had the polite vacancy of someone practicing the absence of interest. "You dropped your parcel," Maigret called. "I don't think so," the man replied. "No? Then take this. You've been leaving it everywhere." He tossed the tin with a gentle underhand. The man caught it and looked down at the vulgar yellow label. Annoyance crossed his neatness. "I don't—" "You do," Maigret said. "You leave your scent on graves and lintels. If it's only considerateness, you will say where." The passenger tipped the tin back into Maigret's palm without touching skin. "You mistake me for someone who does his own errands," he said. "We are looking for a different cemetery." "You will find it if you keep circling," Maigret said. "Meanwhile, your shoes have learned ours." The car coasted away. He didn't chase. "Now," Maigret said to Lambert, "we will go bother no one for a while." That is how people begin to talk. They went back to the café. The patron had cut onions. The room stung. "Another coffee?" he offered. "Later," Maigret said. "On the 13th, did the gentleman with the umbrella dry his sleeve with your towel?" "He asked to wipe a drop that wasn't there. He thanked me as if he had paid. He left you something. A feeling in the cloth I couldn't wash," the man admitted. "So I gave the towel to a painter." "And the fourth?" "The same men in different coats. Our friend with the hat," he nodded at Lambert, "sat by the window and defended his glass. They moved to the table. Maigret took from his parcel 2 pairs of laces and set one at each place. "Ties," he said. "Everyone chooses them in custody or out of it." Lambert smiled without mirth. She said the same. "That we marry the knot we learn at 15. And sometimes someone reaches in and undoes it," Maigret said. It brought the baker's boy, who came for matches and spoke because children ask when adults pretend not to. "Monsieur," he said to Lambert, "yesterday the gentleman with the cap asked me where you buy your polish. I said polish is for church, not bread." "Which gentleman?" Maigret asked. "The one who waits in the car to hate the rain," the boy said. "Did you tell him anything else?" "I said you carry your shoes and your sadness the same way," he blurted. "You didn't mean an unkindness," Maigret said. "You brought us to the next step." Outside, the light failed. "We will see Lognon," he said. "A liquidator of shoes knows where leather has been. If Colin dissolves debts, he may also dissolve the sort of conscience that stains. And if he doesn't, then we'll have learned a smell with no source." That also tells. They set off, carrying bread, laces, and the tin that insisted on following. People who thought themselves too careful to leave a trail. They found Lognon in his office, turning a pen between fingers that distrusted comfort. "You sent me chasing saints," he said, sour. "Colin, 1L at Lenoir Frere, shoe wholesalers in liquidation, delegate for winding up. Car on the firm, driver from a garage in the 11th, Prévost. Address? Faubourg Saint-Martin. Office furnished by nostalgia. Closed at noon." Girl said inventory like a sacrament. He glanced at Lambert. "What has this to do with your cemetery?" "Shoes," Maigret said. "And a notebook. Then debts," Lognon said. Lenoir supplied small shops. Now they collect. Collections less kind than deliveries. A cobbler on Rue Pascal did piecework. When the house cracked, he kept leather and promises. A woman helped evenings, Marie Luce. They walked to the office because cars made too much noise to think. Brass plate, windows like account columns. Inside, a young woman at a desk, eyes brave. "Is Monsieur Colin expected?" Maigret asked. "He is always expected," she said. 4 o'clock. It's 3:20. "We'll keep the furniture company. Do you know a woman who did lists for men with leather on their hands?" he asked. Her fingers paused and resumed. "We have had many lists," she said. "Those written by women are better. If such a list came here, would it enter a file or a pocket?" "It would go where Monsieur Colin advised," she said, doubt small and present. At 10 to 4, the car stopped. Colin arrived, thin umbrella under his arm, hat set down with courtesy. "Monsieur," he said, "forgive the delay. Some estates dislike dying." "We came to return something that wanders," Maigret said, placing a tin of cheap furniture polish on the counter. "You leave this scent where grief tries to remember its own." "My caretaker offends no statute," Colin said. "What offends is a joke with shoes," Maigret replied. "Polished, paired beside the wrong grave?" "Someone's sentimentality," Colin said. I keep ledgers. I don't stage tableau. You keep notebooks, only those on my docket. This one isn't. A small crinkle, vanity warmed. If you mean the little book people pretend not to have seen, it will reach the proper desk if it touches assets. It touches shoes, Maigret said. How they move and why. Does your name appear? If my name appears anywhere, it does so with permission. You've been circling streets, Maigret went on, asking boys where a man buys polish and widows if they burn paper with stamps. You mistake thoroughness for intrusion, Colin said pleasantly. Liquidation is a garden. One pulls weeds so flowers, if any, survive. A woman assisted clients unofficially. I collect improprieties and turn them into dates. And if the woman falls and the bruise sits wrong, that would be for a doctor. Or a staircase that knows more than its boards, he smiled. Let the stairs keep their secrets. You came to ask whether I place shoes. I did not. I have an aversion to piety. You did visit Rue Rollin, Maigret said. Asked about letters, about shoes left outside. I inquired because footwear is stolen in hard times. People steal the things that carry them. If you'll excuse me, I must meet an upholsterer who learns his trade in reverse. We'll walk with you, Maigret said. Sometimes the street adds a figure to the sum. They stepped into the metallic pre-evening. At the corner the pavement lifted. The gutter kept a thin run that made shoes reconsider balance. A woman shepherded a child who was a train. Colin stepped back. His heel caught the lip. He steadied himself with a sudden reach, hand catching and releasing Maigret's sleeve with the neat, economical pressure of a man who had once done that to a human weight. Pardon, he said. Not at all, Maigret answered, letting the angle of the gesture sit like a match unstruck. Back at the car, Colin allowed a last question. The 13th, Maigret said. You choose that day, after the 12th, before bills fall on the 15th, he replied. You will find your shoes, Inspector. Paris returns what it can't be bothered to keep. He rode away. Lambert stood very still, his shoulder discovering memory with a slow sting. You see, he whispered. A hand that knows its work. I see, Maigret said. Rue Pascal. The cobbler's bell rang. A man in an apron looked up. Monsieur Fèvre? The last of him, the man said. What is owed is counted. What is due is guessed. Marie Luce came here. She made numbers sit like boys in Sunday collars. Wrote small, left out nothing. In a notebook, in her own, worn corner where a thumb learns to wait. Has anyone asked for it? A gentleman with a pen stood where you stand. Spoke of inventories. Looked at my hammer as if it might be pledged. I told him I hadn't the book, true. Where did it go? She brought it one evening, and didn't take it when she left. Morning it was gone. I thought I'd dreamed it. Then I saw the place she kept it, between the biscuit tin and thin leather. Empty like a mouth without a tooth. When did she fall? 2 days after. She worried like a string worries a parcel. What in that book shortens a woman's step? Names, he said. And besides some notes to remember. Laces tied by mother. Boots made brave by spit. Souls altered for silence. She said silence comes in sizes. Souls altered for silence. Maigret repeated. A man came at closing the day the book vanished, Fèvre added. Not Colin, cleaner. He didn't smell of leather. He asked if I could make a pair's step less. I said shave the heel. He said no. He wanted the sound gone. I told him that's a sin against pavements. He said pavements forgive faster than wives. His name? He left none. A face that stays unremembered on purpose. Describe his shoes, good leather, not new. Half rubber, half leather soles. The compromise of men who don't like to choose. Outside evening arranged itself. Lamps took their posts. The street examined its echoes. Maigret listened. He wanted the sound gone, he said, and a book vanished that measured sounds. If she opposed him, Lambert said, she wouldn't shout. She'd hold the rail. He would take her hand away. Yes, Maigret said. Tomorrow we let Colin speak beside a warrant. Tonight we watch. The wrong grave points somewhere. Perhaps not to Colin. Perhaps to a man who thinks pavements forgive. Where? Back to the cemetery, he said. Men who choreograph silence return to see if it looks the way they planned. Bring your hat. Leave your good shoes on. The gates of the cemetery were closed for the night, but closed was not the same as sealed. Maigret had known too many caretakers to believe in locks that weren't supplemented by a shrug. The drizzle had ended, leaving the gravel damp and noiseless under shoes. A mist hovered low. Not thick enough to conceal, but enough to make every tree appear a little more deliberate in its posture. Lambert walked half a step behind, hat in hand, though the air didn't justify it. His breathing had the careful rhythm of a man forcing calm into lungs that wanted something else. Maigret stopped once beneath a lamp and looked at him. "If you grow restless," he said quietly, "tell me before your feet do. Silence has its uses, but not if it makes men stumble." "I won't," Lambert replied. They moved past the wall where moss had the stubbornness of tenants. The path branched. Maigret chose the left, not because it was nearer, but because it curved toward a view of both Section D and Madame Vasseur's grave. He wanted sightlines more than shortcuts. They reached the bench where he had sat the night before. The wood was wet again, but he lowered himself without hesitation. "We'll wait," he said. The mist thickened with the patience of laundry steam. Somewhere a bell tolled 10, muffled by distance and wet air. From beyond the wall a car passed slowly, then receded. Lambert kept shifting his hat from hand to hand, the way men without cigarettes occupy their fingers. Maigret smoked, not because he wanted to, but because smoke gave off the illusion of a companion. Half an hour passed. Then the faintest sound, not steps but a hesitation in the mist, like a body holding breath. Maigret lifted his pipe from his mouth and exhaled slowly, letting smoke drift across the line of sight. A shape moved between stones. The man carried no light, but his shoes betrayed him. The dull thud of half-rubber soles, exactly as Fèvre the cobbler had described. The figure bent near Vasseur's grave. For a long moment he crouched, then straightened and stepped back as if inspecting his work. The polished shoes were not there. Lagrange had removed them in the morning. Instead, the grave was bare but for the little violets. The man looked around once, not seeing the bench, then turned toward Section D. His stride shortened at the row where Marie-Luce lay. Lambert's hand twitched, then steadied. Maigret let the silence hold. The man stopped before the spoiled photograph. He leaned close and seemed to whisper, though the words were swallowed. His hand rose and adjusted something invisible, perhaps habit, perhaps memory. Then, with the same neat economy, he removed a folded square from his pocket and slid it beneath the stone border. "Now," Maigret murmured. They rose together. The man turned at the sound but did not run. He straightened, face expressionless in the weak light. He wore a coat too good for the hour, a hat lowered, and gloves so pale they seemed luminous. His eyes were neither surprised nor afraid, only calculating. "Good evening," Maigret said. "Late visit?" The man inclined his head. "Grief keeps hours of its own, and silence has souls," Maigret replied. The man's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "I don't know you. You know enough to keep half rubber underfoot." Fèvre remembered. "So did the pavements. You've been listening to cobblers." "I listen where silence creaks," Maigret said. He pointed at the folded square under the stone. "What is that?" "Nothing of value. We'll see." He stooped and retrieved it before the man could protest. It was a page torn from a small notebook, ink cramped but precise. On it were names, each with a note. Beside one, souls altered for silence. Beside another, laces tied by wife never changed. And one more, half smudged. Colin, umbrella as alibi. "You kept it," Maigret said softly. The man's gloved hands opened and closed once. "It isn't mine. It isn't yours," Maigret agreed. "It was hers. Marie-Luce wrote this." "She wrote too much," the man said, tone almost admiring. "She noticed what shouldn't matter, and someone decided it mattered too much. She stumbled," the man said, "with careful flatness." "You gave her the bruise," Maigret replied. The man looked at him, eyes steady. "You cannot prove what mist hides." "No, but men confess in more ways than one." For a long moment they stood like figures in a tableau. Then the man turned, not to flee, but to walk back toward the gate. Maigret did not stop him with force. He followed, Lambert beside him. At the gate, the man hesitated, as though expecting the car that did not appear. The street outside was empty. "Who waits for you?" Maigret asked. "No one," the man said. "That is why I polish what cannot stay bright." "You place the shoes?" He shook his head. "Not I. Someone else who enjoys irony. I prefer erasure." Maigret pocketed the page and let him go. He walked away into mist until his outline dissolved. Lambert released a breath that seemed older than the evening. "You let him go." "For now," Maigret said. "He's a man who cannot stop circling. He'll return. They always return to the places they tried to tidy." They left the cemetery in silence. At the cafe, the patron looked up but did not speak. He only poured beer unasked. Maigret laid the page on the zinc. The patron leaned over, eyes narrowing. "Her hand," Lambert said. "Yes," Maigret answered. "She wrote men down the way others keep birds in cages. She saw how they walked, how they tied, how they polished, and one of them thought he could walk without sound if only she didn't write it. And now?" Lambert asked. "Now we wait," Maigret said. "The book is scattered. Pages will surface like driftwood. Each will carry a man's secret. Whoever collects them will think he can erase her. He'll betray himself with the attempt." The clock behind the counter struck 11. The cafe door opened briefly, letting in a slice of damp night. No one entered. The slice closed. Maigret drained his glass and stood. "Tomorrow we'll see Colin with his umbrella and ask how many names he meant to keep dry. Tonight, let the silence remind us it has a sound after all." They walked out into the night, shoes dark with damp, their echo steady on the pavement that forgives nothing and remembers everything. Dawn decided nothing. He slept little. The sort leaves night on the tongue. At breakfast, Madame Maigret buttered bread, smoothing a crease. "Dry shoes too close to the stove and they pucker," she said. "Leather tells on people who hurry it." He kissed her cheek. The thought lodged. Men afraid of sound choose the wrong heat, then spend the day apologizing with polish. At the Quai, the paper had its own weather. A memorandum wanted shapes that looked like results. He initialed where one initials what one will ignore. Lognan arrived with satisfaction disguised as gloom. "Colin dislikes being inspected," he said. "Driver prévost." Lenoir's yard is gravel white as a dentist. The porter says gentlemen come after hours to consult the stove. "What hour?" "After 9. He heard it breathe. "Names?" A shrug. "Also a man from the creditors' committee, Daru." "Fine prévost," Maigret said. "Ask which hour owns him lately." Count his pauses. He went to Faubourg Saint-Martin. The gate of Lenoir Frère had been painted when men still said telephone. The porter's cap and scarf had the neatness of people who lock things. "You were here yesterday," the man said, "to keep the furniture company." "Last night the stove?" "It remembered paper," the porter said. "Two gentlemen. One walked like someone measuring carpet. The other avoided thresholds. Cologne that knew its century. Furniture polished cheap. They crossed the yard. Gravel creaked like sugar. The Godin sat warm. In the ash, grey flakes and a corner of envelope paste that refused to die. Beside the stove lay a thin blue ribbon tied around nothing. "Nearly the same blue," Maigret murmured. The porter nodded. "My sister said blue is honest when it darkens." He coaxed up the stubborn corner with a spoon. A sliver of watermark, a bruise of a stamp, the ghost of lines where a list had been. No names survived, only the habit of them. Who came first? "The one with pale gloves," the porter said. He pocketed ribbon and sliver, left the rest to finish and walked to Colin's office in a pace that let thoughts pass without jostling. The girl lifted her lashes. "He expects you," she said. Colin emerged with the umbrella tucked like a principal. "You have ash on your cuff," Maigret said. He brushed nothing. "The city sheds." "Are we still talking about shoes?" "About lists that won't stay burned," Maigret said, setting ribbon, sliver and the grave page on the desk. Colin studied without touching. "If I had wanted to erase a woman's notebook, I'd have been thorough," he said. "You are thorough," Maigret answered. "You admire it. You circle, decline to touch, and let other men put on pale gloves. If you are angling at murder, angle elsewhere," Colin replied. "On staircases that know more than their boards?" He smiled. "Let stairs keep their secrets. Daru goes where committees are. Ask him why blue ribbon burns." On the boulevard, he telephoned home. Madame Maigret answered with the hush that makes a receiver warmer than it is. "Remember Cousin Émile?" he asked. "Drying boots under the stove?" "They wrinkled and told on him for years," she said. "Just so." "Just so." Lognan returned with a file like rain. "Prévost eats in the 11th, he said. Between 9 and 10 he waited in the car while 2 gentlemen burned what didn't belong to summer. Names reluctantly, Colin and Daru. Also a third who leaves only a smell. Gloves pale, carry anything out. A small brown parcel tied with blue. Delivered to Daru, and the car by the cemetery. The same. He takes them to look at stones and back to look at columns. You will be gloomy near that boulevard, Maigret said. Learn the gloveman's walk. Evening sloped into the quarter. The cafe gave off onions. The patron set down beer without asking. Lambert held the glass with both hands. "What does Daru want?" he asked. "To be the man who tidies more quietly than death," Maigret said. "Some can't bear an untied end. And the wrong grave? A joke or a map? Not Daru's joke." He adds he doesn't play. Through the door beads came the painter who had been given the towel. He looked scrubbed where paint never reaches. "The towel still smells of something that isn't paint," he said. "Yesterday a gentleman asked for turpentine that wouldn't stain gloves." I laughed. "He didn't. Here? In my studio 3 streets over. A car waited, but he didn't trust the driver. He bought turpentine, then asked for a place to burn paper. I told him to use the stove in winter, the sink in summer. What did he burn? He changed his mind, folded it away like a man who had found better fire. Gloves pale? Like a dentist's promise." When the painter left, Maigret listened to where silence thickened. "We'll visit Daru," he said. "Boulevard de Port-Royal has a quiet that belongs to billfolds." A concierge regarded their hats and allowed the staircase. Daru's door opened before they rang, as if he had been looking through a lens. He was the right age for certainty, and the wrong age for surprise. The gloves folded in his hand were clean of everything except the idea of being clean. "Monsieur," he said, courteous the way a blade is courteous. "We let room speak a minute," Maigret said. The room spoke in low polish. Tables hid their grain. Hagotin was summer cold, yet cleaned as if used. On the mantel stood bronze children's shoes. A parcel, brown tied with blue, rested on a side table like a thought deferred. "You collect ends," Maigret said. "Ribbons, accounts, the moment before leather turns." "I keep order," Daru answered. "And what did order require on the staircase of Rue Rollin?" He smiled. "To keep what was owed from being scattered." Maigret's glance touched the hearth. On the fender, a small crescent of black had caught where gloves forget to look. He didn't point. He left it, as a man leaves a picture slightly off level to see who will reach first. "We won't be long," he said. "A name. Who admired your tidiness enough to imitate it with shoes beside the wrong grave?" "I don't visit cemeteries at night," Daru said. "I have a concierge for days." Then someone who owes you politeness paid his respects clumsily. Daru's eyes moved once toward the parcel, away again. "If you have business, bring paper that wants stamps. Otherwise take your questions back to places that accept them." "We'll do that," Maigret said. "Meanwhile, don't let the stove pucker anything you hope to keep." They left Daru's corridor without being shown out, the parcel remaining where it lay, as if a cat sleeping. On the stairs, the smell of polish and summer cold iron followed them a few steps, and then surrendered to cabbage from a lower floor. Outside, evening had mislaid its color. Cars went by with the careful speed of people counting their breaths. Maigret stood still long enough to let his impatience leak away, then turned toward the prefecture, with Lambert beside him like an extra thought one carries without putting down the first. At the quay, he sent Lambert home with a nod that was permission rather than dismissal. "Eat," he said. "Then sleep if you can. In the morning we will listen to men who prefer not to be heard." Lambert touched his hat brim, an old salute to authority that had behaved, and went. Lognon came in, damp at the edges. "Your Daru shuts drawers with his fingertips," he reported, sitting without being invited, and making the chair honest about its joints. "The driver says he waits a lot and hears nothing, which is to say he hears too much. Where is the garage?" "Rue de la Folie Méricourt. They keep cars quiet there, the kind of quiet that costs." "We'll walk," Maigret said. The 11th wore its work clothes late. The garage had a mouth like a train shed, and a floor smudged with the skins of days. A radio whispered dance music to screws in jars. Prévost looked up from a bucket, not frightened, not glad. He was the sort of man who has learned to present the blank a foreman prefers. "Good evening," Maigret said. "You deliver eclairs to patients." The driver blinked once, understanding more quickly than he liked to show. "My passenger eats when he remembers," he said. "He doesn't like sugar. He likes the idea that someone waited. And you?" "I like cars that do not decide anything for me." "You were at Lenoir last night." "I'm often at Lenoir." "You were also where gravel remembers." Prévost's eyes slid toward the far bay, where a car sat uncovered out of pride, then back. "I drive where I'm told." "Sometimes you don't," Maigret said mildly. "Sometimes you park farther than you need. Sometimes you leave the motor off so you can hear a staircase breathe." A wash of color climbed into Prévost's face and drained again without leaving a mark. He wiped his hands on a clean rag, found the rag too clean for the use, and set it down. "I am a driver," he said, as if reciting something a man at a counter had written on a paper in front of him. "I was a driver in the war and I remained a driver after it, which is more difficult." "You placed a pair of shoes at a grave," Maigret said, as if noting a change in the weather. Prévost looked at the floor, found a crack he could recognize again, and nodded once as if answering a priest in a box. "Not because I'm devout. I do not kneel without an instruction, but there are nights when the city puts a hand on your shoulder and you turn." "Why the wrong stone?" "Because men were watching the right one," he said at once. "Because the woman with the apron that gives her courage knows faces the way a concierge knows names, and I didn't want her to see mine. Because the wrongness is what you notice. You, I mean, and men like you. Not the ones I drive." He kept talking because silence would have tapped him on the shoulder too. "I saw him hold her. Not on the staircase. Before that. In a shop doorway because it had rained, and there was a drip from the gutter, and he wanted to stop it without moving the sky. He took her by the shoulder to turn her face away from a boy carrying a parcel, so he wouldn't hear his own name, said the way women use a first name when they have already made up their mind. He did it like a man who has turned a face before. After on the stairs I heard something. You hear when you wait because you are paid to. Not a cry. The sound a body makes when it strikes a place that isn't expecting it." There was a pause afterwards. "It is the pause that tells. A man being angry doesn't pause. A man being careful does." He swallowed, and the swallow felt like breaking a rule. "I did not go up. Drivers do not go up. But I saw the stain on his cuff later, that he had wiped and missed where the seam hides a little dirt. When I cleaned the car, I found a scuff on the heel of a half-rubber sole that wasn't mine and wasn't the boss's. You told no one." "I am not paid to talk," he said. The words bitter only because they were true. Then the burning began. I drove to the yard, to the office, to the painter. I waited, while paper smelled like a kitchen making toast at the wrong hour. I smelled polish in places where even widows don't bother to reach. I watched him bring his parcel home tied with blue he did not earn. I watched the other one circle with his umbrella like a man who cannot get wet without witnesses. He looked at his hands, finding nothing, the cleanliness accusing him more than dirt would have. "So I took the man's shoes," he finished, almost surprised to hear it said plainly, not to make a mockery. "I saw him once in his hall carrying them like a mother carries a child that has been bathed. I thought, here is a man who understands that shoes tell. I put them by a stone that is honest about not belonging, so that someone would say, 'Who has done this?' And it would not be the men I drive." The collapse when it came was tidy. He did not weep. He did not raise his voice. He sat on the little wooden stool meant for valves and put his face in his hands with the neatness of a man who has practiced shame without making a scene. The radio announced a foxtrot and then thought better of it. In the quiet, a car outside coughed and died. "He did not mean to kill her," Prévost said into his palms. "He meant to move her out of the way of his own attention. But when he had done it, he became the sort of man who means what he has done. That is worse." "Which he?" Maigret asked, though he knew what the answer would feel like. The driver raised his head, eyes red only where men let salt gather without permission. "Daru," he said, "the one who keeps order for other people." He was afraid of the book, because it put the wrong words next to his name. He thought the umbrella man would keep him dry, They both thought the city would agree to forget. "And Colin?" "He is a lid," Prévost said with unexpected exactness. "He fits on pots. He does not ask what is cooking." "You will come in the morning," Maigret said. "You will say this quietly and once." "I will," the driver answered. "Am I arrested?" "You put shoes by the wrong stone," Maigret said. "It's not yet a statute." He stood. "Do not tidy anything tonight. Leave a mess for once. Let it breathe." Outside the air had turned thin and honest. On Boulevard Richard Lenoir, the light in his window drew him as a stove draws boots in winter. Madame Maigret had kept a plate warm without consulting his hunger. He ate 2 mouthfuls and left the rest because the body settles more easily when it has been recognized even if it is not satisfied. "You will take your scarf," she said, not as a warning but as a way of saying she saw the night too. "Tomorrow," he told her, "a man will stand as if he were already behind a desk and answer questions as if they were poorly written. We will not press. He will press himself. People who polish too much forget to look," she said. He slept 3 hours like a man who has borrowed them and must return them. At 8, he was at the quay. Longyon had a warrant shaped like a promise someone intends to keep, nevertheless. They went together to Boulevard de Port-Royal. The concierge sniffed at the paper and found it fragrant enough. Daru opened at the knock before they finished knocking. He had not slept. Cleanliness had invaded him the way ivy takes a wall without seeking permission. Bronze baby shoes gleamed with a zeal that mocked the little feet that had once filled them. The parcel tied with blue was gone. On the fender, the crescent of black had been wiped badly. The smear had only grown longer, like gilt spread with a rag. "Monsieur," he said, and his voice made a little bow. "We'll keep this tidy," Maigret told him. "Names are not needed when the room provides them." Daru looked for the umbrella that ought to have been in his hand and discovered he had forgotten it. The discovery unbalanced him more than the paper with stamps. "You will sit," Maigret said. "And before we discuss shoes, you will tell me how long a pause is when a body strikes where it shouldn't. You know it to the second." Daru sat. He placed his gloves beside him, fingers aligned, and stared at them as if they might correct his answer. The room waited with the patience furniture learns from men who can afford to keep it longer than they keep their decisions. He lifted his eyes at last and found no umbrella to speak through. "Long enough," he said, his voice dry as unpolished wood, "for a man to understand the rest of his life will be in the wrong tense." The confession did not come with spectacle, only with the weight of inevitability. Daru sat there, his gloves perfectly aligned on the chair beside him, his eyes not on Maigret but on the smear of black that clung stubbornly to the fender, despite his attempts to erase it. He spoke quietly, as though the words were no longer his property but debts he had to settle before leaving. She wouldn't stop writing. Not numbers, those I could tolerate, but the notes, small remarks, harmless if you glanced at them. Shoes, soles, how men tied their laces, who walked with silence when they should not. She noticed too much, and she kept it where someone might read. He pressed his thumb into his palm, leaving no mark, only the gesture of a man trying to grind something out of existence. "I asked her to stop." She laughed. Not cruelly, but lightly, as if it didn't matter. For her it didn't. For me it was everything. Maigret said nothing. Silence has a way of pressing men forward better than any question. "She wasn't afraid of me," Daru went on. "That made it worse. Fear can be bargained with, but indifference." He drew a breath that was almost a sigh. "On the stairs she tried to pass me. I caught her arm only to slow her, only to insist. She lost her balance. I let go too late or too early. You know the rest. The bruise, the pause. I stood over her longer than I should have, listening for something that didn't come." He looked then at Maigret, his eyes dry. "It was not murder, Inspector. It was negligence. But negligence, too, has to be hidden." Maigret filled his pipe, struck a match, and let the flame catch slowly. "You burned the notebook," I tried. But she had scattered it. A page here, a scrap there. She knew better than I thought. I could never be sure it was gone. He gestured vaguely, the movement of a man who once tidied offices and estates. That's why Colin circled, why the driver kept his ears open, why shoes were left where they should not be. Each of us tidied in his own way. None of us succeeded. "And so," Maigret said softly, "the shoes beside your sister's grave, Madame Vasseur, the blue ribbon in the stove, the scraps that return like driftwood, each is a reminder that nothing ever stays erased." Daru did not answer. He placed the gloves on his lap and folded his hands over them, as though committing to stillness at last. Later, at the prefecture, the papers would describe it simply: a fall. A belated confession, a matter of inheritance and debts. But those who had seen the widow's eyes, or the way Lambert carried his shoes as if they were a child's burden, would know there was more. They would know that love, pride, and silence had tangled together until a woman's life slipped between them. That evening, Maigret walked home through the drizzle, collar turned up, his pipe extinguished, but still between his teeth. The city smelled of wet stone and tired bread. At his own door, he paused to knock the damp from his shoes before stepping inside. Madame Maigret looked up from her mending. "Well?" she asked, not needing details. "He confessed," Maigret said, "but not to murder, at least not in the way papers will print. It was an untidiness that grew too heavy." He tried to polish it away. He couldn't. She nodded, set her sewing aside, and poured him a small glass. They sat together in the familiar quiet. the kind that didn't need to be explained. Outside, rain began again, softly at first, then steadier, a rhythm that belonged only to the city. And in that rhythm, Maigret thought, there were no silent souls, no erased pauses, only footsteps that the pavements, forgiving or not, would always remember. The case was closed. Yet it lingered as they always did, not in files or statements, but in the ordinary weight of human weakness, of the small lies and careless gestures that could change a life. He lifted the glass, drank, and listened to the rain. It was enough. It was